format we'll be using tonight is a round-robin approach, so that I will ask a question, and then each of the panelists will have a chance to answer. We want to do this so everybody gets a chance to speak. If I were to just ask each one questions, we could go here a long time, and I think we would not get as much information. So we decided to adopt this approach, and hopefully, if we get through all the questions I have in short order, then we'll have a chance for you to ask questions from the floor. So the first question tonight for the panelists has to do with your involvement. What is it that your organization are doing that really makes a difference in your understanding of homelessness and the way you're trying to meet the needs that you see? So, Bill, do you want to start?
Sure. Is that on? Okay, good. Never sounds like it from up here. I'm the Reverend Bill Kirlin-Hackett. I direct the Interfaith Task Force on Homelessness. We were founded in 2001 under the theme, Creating the Political Will to End Homelessness. And there were 350 people at St. Mark's Cathedral, and they decided to put us together to help this along. Right after we came together, so did the 10-year plan, and then the 5-year plan, and now the regional authority, which you will hear about tonight, in case you don't know about it. We've done education and advocacy, and our initial motto was creating the political will to end homelessness. That's more true now than it's ever been in our history. In 2011, we started work under, I guess it would be Daryl Smith and Jerry DeGreek, under Mayor McGinn, to reach out to people living in vehicles because there was no outreach to vehicles. And that was directly because of a law that was passed in Seattle to gain fines from everybody like us. And it was called scofflaw ordinance. So we've been doing scofflaw mitigation for 11 years. The last 2 years we're actually getting funded, and now we're under the regional authority to do that. Jenn is one of the workers, and you'll hear a lot from her about the direct work. So right now we're doing covering all of Seattle, essentially with 3 people. And as you can imagine, that's very difficult. I left these blue flyers on here. They're a guide that we printed 2 years ago on how faith communities can start their own safe parking program. But the number on the cover is important. It really is 2741 in the last point in time count, the number of people living in vehicles, which was 1/2 of the unsheltered. So most people don't understand that half of the unsheltered people live in vehicles. And that's still the number we go by because we're rolling out a new point in time count right now, and we don't have a better number than that. But one of the things that you will understand very quickly is it's not a very nice night. People are out there right now living in this. If they're in a vehicle, they are probably looking for more tarps, etc. You all maybe have some experiences of homelessness, and you'll hear more about that up here tonight. But I just want you to be ever present, no matter what it is we're saying up here and who's saying it, that right now we have a lot of people homeless who are trying to just stay safe. So I'll stop with that, and I know that there'll be more that comes out in other questions. So I'll stop with that, and I know that there'll be more that comes out in other questions.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sharon Lee. I'm the Executive Director of Lehigh, or Low Income Housing Institute. It's great, really great to see everybody coming out tonight. So we are a housing nonprofit, and we started over 30 years ago to provide innovative solutions to the housing and homelessness crisis. If you remember way back, we had homeless people living in a bus barn by Seattle Center, and it was embarrassing and a crisis. So our first building was to purchase a hotel, the Aloha Inn, and we had a partnership with, and then so we bought the hotel, got funding from the mayor and the federal government, and ran a transitional housing program with Catholic Community Services. So today, if you look at some of our buildings, I think you may have walked by them. The University District Food Bank, that's one of our buildings. We basically created space for the U District Food Bank and then put housing for homeless young adults upstairs and housing for low-wage workers. And then we also have Gossip Place in the U District, and that includes housing for homeless couples, homeless veterans, young adults. And so far, we've grown over the years. And of course, what's most important about homelessness is providing housing and services. So we have over 3,000 units of affordable housing, but not everybody can get into housing because there's a lack of supply. So we got so frustrated with the situation, we pioneered the idea of having tiny house villages. So today we have 16 tiny house villages, and last year we housed 1,100 men, women, and children. And if we had not provided, along with our partners, and we have lots of partners. We have faith organizations, public agencies, community groups. We actually have Barb Oliver helping us with all her volunteers building the tiny houses. Barb? And so for people who care about homelessness, they can donate to help buy wood for the tiny house. It's about $4,000 a tiny house. Or they can go with Barb to our little factory in Soto and build. So we are very happy that we've got so many volunteers and so many people who care. So in addition to tiny houses, we also have 2 urban rest stops, an urban rest stop in Ballard and an urban rest stop downtown. Unfortunately, we had to close the one in the U District because our church partner sold the building. But we are looking for another location for a hygiene center, which is showers, restrooms, laundry for people who really need basic hygiene services. So we're really pleased to be part of the North Seattle community in terms of our efforts.
Just a quick question, Sharon. The people that live in these tiny houses, what's the average stay and where do they go when they leave?
Well, okay, I'll give you an example. Many of you know that we just opened Rosie's Village on 45th and Roosevelt, and thank you to Councilmember Pedersen for that. And we're on Sound Transit property. So we have 56% of the people who exit and transition out of a tiny house move into housing, which is a very high number if you compare it to like basic shelter. There are many basic shelters where maybe 10% of the people who exit get into housing, or maybe 20%. But tiny house villages have been so successful at stabilizing people. 65% of the people are transitioning under 6 months. So we do have some long-term stayers, but to the extent that we can provide permanent housing. So for instance, when we opened up the Marion West in the U District, and we opened up some new buildings, we just opened up 4 buildings on Capitol Hill. We quickly moved people from a tiny house into permanent housing. So we depend on you, the housing levy, we depend on Jumpstart funds, so that once we can build the housing, we can quickly move people in.
Thank you, Sharon. And Ann Martins is here in the place of Marc Dones, who was unable to come tonight, but Ann works in the office at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority.
I do indeed. Hi, everybody. My name is Ann Martins. I serve as the Director of External Affairs and Communications at the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Thank you for welcoming us tonight. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. Like, speaking in front of a crowd is still weird after all that Zooming. But it's fun to be here tonight. I actually grew up in one of those brick houses over on 46, so I used to ride my bike to the playfield over here. So this is kind of neat. The Regional Homelessness Authority was set up to unify and coordinate what had been a really fragmented system. Back in 2018, I believe the city and county brought in a couple of folks to do an audit of the whole system, and one of the things they found was there were 6 different agencies that all claimed some sort of control and oversight, and there were a lot of programs, but the programs weren't well coordinated and the funding wasn't well coordinated. So one of the key recommendations was to stand up this unifying and coordinating body that would serve region-wide. So we cover all of King County. We have sort of assumed responsibility for everything that the City of Seattle and King County were providing in terms of homeless response services. So we are responsible for the contracts for shelters and outreach. We work very closely with everybody on the stage tonight. I think it's also important to note that we were very delayed in getting started up. My boss, our CEO, Marc, who I apologize was not able to be here tonight, but Marc was hired in April of 2020. So we lost a full year during COVID. We were supposed to be set up a year ago and going, and then in the course of COVID, housing instability was really exacerbated, and a lot of people found themselves in harder times, and there were more medical bills, and housing instability was really exacerbated. A lot of the problems that we're dealing with, there were more medical bills, I was employed in housing instability was really exacerbated, and we are not quite a full year into operations now. At the beginning of this year, we are not on my contract into operations now. We are going at the beginning of this year, we are starting to think about understanding the housing area. We are going outside to make sure that we can really build the services and the shelters and the things that people want in order to meet their needs. We will be working with our community to try and reimagine the system in a way that is more effective and more humane and can really meet the needs of more people. More effective and more humane.
Okay, and did you want to say anything about the focus you have downtown and your partnership for Zero?
Yeah, so this is really exciting, actually. Another one of the recommendations that came out of that audit was to unify and coordinate the private funding. We have a lot of really helpful businesses and philanthropists who want to do their part. So there's an organization called We Are In, and it's wearein.org if you want to find out more about it. So there's an organization called We Are In that is really that coalition of business and philanthropy and private partners. With their support, we just got a $10 million grant to start up a peer navigation program and a really defined effort called Partnership for Zero. We're focusing first on downtown Seattle because that is where the largest concentration of people living unsheltered is. So we are going to focus on downtown Seattle. We are treating an emergency like an emergency. We're borrowing protocols from emergency management. We'll have a unified command center with decision-making authority that can really deploy resources quickly. We've just hired our 4 peer navigator co-directors. These are people who have lived experience of homelessness. They really understand what the barriers are to getting services, how to navigate the systems, and they can do outreach that is longitudinal and stays with a person throughout all of these systems. So you have an ally, you have an advocate, you have a coach to walk with you for this whole journey from homeless to housed. And those people really serve as the connective tissue between all the services and all the programs, and make sure that a person who's living unsheltered can get their needs met, and nobody's going to give up on them. So that project is just starting up. We estimate that we can probably have everybody in downtown housed by the end of the year. Our system actually houses about 6,000 people a year, maybe a little bit more. The inflow, the number of people who are becoming homeless is just significantly larger than that. So we think if we focus, that we can show proof of concept and really help a lot of people in downtown. We're also going to be announcing the same type of approach in a suburban community coming soon. Stay tuned. I'm excited about it. I have a lot of faith in our team. We work with really smart, dedicated people, and like I said, I grew up here. I'm raising my daughter here. We are going to make this work.
Thank you, Ann. Alex, do you want to introduce yourself and share what the city council is involved with? Thank you, Ann. Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you for having me.
The city council.
Thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight. Really, it's really heartwarming to see everybody here caring about people who are unsheltered and wanting to learn more and hold all of us accountable up here to get results. I recognize that homelessness is the #1 issue on people's minds in Seattle, and I've been a city council member, one of the 9 city council members for the last 2.5 years. One of the first things I was able to do was to vote to help create the Regional Homelessness Authority. I really believe that, as what Ann was saying, that it was a fragmented system and that Bradshaw is here in the audience tonight. Also, Councilor Bradshaw really was here on the City Council and helped to get this done. Working with the King County Council, working with the former mayor, a lot of people came together to make that happen. And it creates a major change. So what our organization is doing now, the City Council, is funding, helping to fund the Regional Homelessness Authority. It's a regional problem. It requires regional solutions. And we need other cities around the region to be doing their fair share to help house those who are suffering unsheltered. So the City Council most recently provided about $100 million, which is almost half of the budget for the Regional Homelessness Authority. We also are the bookends of the system. We still do provide funding to nonprofits to do the initial engagement and outreach for people who are living unsheltered. There's a visible homelessness that you see in our parks, in our sidewalks, in our greenways. So that outreach component is, there's still a team from the city that does that. And then on the back end, it's it's funding that permanent housing that Sharon Lee builds and other nonprofits build. Thanks to the taxpayers, we have, the generosity of you, we have the Seattle Housing Levy, which provides the bulk of that funding to build low-income housing, including low-income housing to serve those who are currently experiencing homelessness and the subset of that population that requires supportive services. So that, I know that we work very closely with the Harrell administration too. Bruce Harrell is very committed to this. This is his top priority, is reducing homelessness. And so Tiffany Washington is his deputy mayor, who is not able to join us tonight, but the City Council is working collaboratively with the new mayor.
Thank you, Alex. Jen, you bring a different perspective and a different experience and involvement. I'd like you to share your experience of having been homeless and what you're doing now. I'd like you to share your experience of having been homeless and what you're doing now. I'd like you to share your experience of having been homeless and what you're doing now.
Like that. Thanks for the instructions. Like that. He was kind of scary at the beginning. My name's Jennifer Adams. I have lived experience. I was out there from 2007 to 2014. It was a different environment. You weren't allowed to pitch a tent. You weren't allowed to be anywhere. It was a lot different. After a while, I got a van. That was a lot different. Pretty soon, people didn't expect that I was homeless. They don't look homeless. They don't think that you are, and all of a sudden you're invisible. But I'm used to invisible because for 27 years I've had a very invisible disease called MS. And I had that while I was homeless. And if you know anything about that, when you're stressed out or you're having a bad day, your body can shut down. So it made it really hard for me to do some things, work and stuff like that. It's really easy for me to find those people, to find the ones hiding in their cars, in the neighborhoods that are broken, that don't want to be seen because they're proud, because they don't want help, they can do this themselves. That's the American way, right? So that's what I'm good at, that's what I do. I walk with people, as we were all saying. It's really important to partner in companionship with people. And you know, maybe they don't like you that day or the next day, but all relationships have their ups and downs, and you just stick with it. Maybe they don't like you that day. And eventually things turn different ways, and things start to fall into place, and then people can get out. If they've been out there for a long time, they've been told things that aren't true, and maybe their thinking is upside down on how services work, so it makes it a little bit harder for us to get our job done. I team up with everybody in the city to get anybody help that I can. If we don't have bus tickets, we find them through REACH or Community Services or Lehigh or RHA. We do whatever we can to patch, to make things work so that we can walk with people to get them to where they need to be. It's important to walk the way that they want to and not try to fix them in a box that doesn't work for them. So I've learned a lot from where I was at. I would not take it back. I am blessed that I was homeless, that I got to see what most people who have never been homeless don't see. It's a different world, and we really need to reach out and humanize people. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different story. And there are so many invisible things that you cannot see. You can judge just by thinking one way, but that's not the right way. I mean, everything is different than what you think it is when you figure it out. So patience is a virtue in this case. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for sharing that. There are many challenges involved in the work you do with the homeless, and each of you find those challenges as you try and do what you're doing. What are some of the most significant challenges that you've met and that you've had to handle and try and deal with?
Well, since we're... Am I on again? Boy, I sure can't tell. Since
on.
we're the ones here who are actually on the streets, and Lehigh does have some folks who engage where we work, there's two things that present challenge. One is what Jenn described, which is what happens to you when you're in homelessness. The trauma is something that is measured from barely recognizable to completely debilitating. It's relentless. When I started working years ago with the authorized tent encampments, their number one word was always safety. We have to be safe in everything we do. And that's the main concern that we see among people who are homeless, that they want to be safe. And there's not too many ways to do that because you're often at risk from other people who are on the streets, not always homeless, some are predators, or sometimes you're at risk from the powers that be. Some of the things that are impeding our work in doing vehicle residency are the powers that be. We're in a kind of a grace period, I guess, for RHA and the city, the new mayor. And they're trying to figure out how they do again what they used to do for the rules that are on the books. Like there's a 72-hour move rule. Well, it was suspended during COVID, so people stayed in place. That was good news and bad news, because a lot of their vehicles wouldn't start when they resumed the 72-hour move. A lot of business owners got tired of people being on the streets, and so now they put out what's called ecology blocks. They're really architectural barriers. They're these concrete blocks that are about 6 feet long, 3 feet high. There's thousands of them on the street. They're illegal. The fine's $1,000 a day for the first occurrence for one block. But the city isn't enforcing that law right now because I guess they're trying to figure out what to do. So many of them proliferated. We also see the scofflaw that we were formed to do, like for the ordinance, and we always got notices ahead of time to prevent harm. And so we didn't get anybody impounded for 10 years. It was wonderful. Parking enforcement would call us. We'd go out and take care of what was needed. But now scofflaw is not even being enforced, and the parking enforcement doesn't know what's going on. Everybody's kind of in this little grace period. And I'm using grace as a kind word here. It's a very confusing period. And it's confusing to me, but it's way more confusing to the people on the streets. So we're constantly having, and then there's the Long versus Seattle Supreme Court decision. So you'll drive by vehicles and you'll see, I'm a homestead. Their car is a homestead. That's what the Supreme Court decision said. But it didn't put any teeth into what that means. All it did was it eliminated excessive fines by impound companies and then didn't allow them to auction off the vehicle. Well, hardly anybody knows that. So we're working with the State AG Office of Civil Rights to try to get it disseminated to everybody. So there's a lot of confusion out there, even among those of us who are supposed to have some of the answers. So these are barriers. The barrier of living homeless and maybe having to be isolated. Jenn mentioned something about being invisible, and I'm reading a book by one of my rest in peace mentors, and he quoted someone, "Invisibility breaks us to pieces." Invisibility. You don't know who you can trust. Who can you be visible to when you're homeless? Do you want to be visible to someone with a badge who comes up? They're not sure. That's why we come back. And we keep track, and we're creating through RHA by name lists soon. In other words, we're going to treat everybody by their name and by what they need. But we're not ready for that this year. We have a vehicle residency outreach group through RHA, and we're creating great ideas. And we're still doing the job the same way on the streets that we used to do it, yeah, with repairs and whatever else we can do. So the barriers exceed creating pathways to the housing these folks do and others, Bellwether and others, Plymouth, DESC. Outreach is always where you start to get someone into housing. Nobody just trips into housing. Well, there might be a few, I don't know. but it's a very difficult pathway to make it out of homelessness. And then we're watching, and I'll finish here, we're watching what's gone on in our economy, we're watching the evictions finally take hold, and most people only have a car to turn to if they get evicted. So we're very worried right now about what might happen in terms of escalating the population of people in vehicles. And these are people who have not been homeless. If they're in a car, we're going to try to get them out of that situation into housing faster, but where? I mean, Health Through Housing, the King County program, is buying up hotels. Maybe you read about that. They're reconstructing some of the rooms so that they are appropriate for people to be housed in, so there's a lot of moving parts, and Sharon knows how hard and how long it takes to build housing, even other models. So we're in a crisis right now, and I'm feeling it's almost as bad as I think it's ever been, even though we have a lot of the hopes on the horizon. But if you ever move toward a horizon, the horizon keeps moving. So that's what it feels like on the streets right now. A lot of suffering, a lot of pain. Our colleagues, police, parking enforcement, and others, it's harder to make the partnerships we thought we had. So we need that guidance as leaders, whether it's from council, which we would appreciate, and also from the executive office. They need to, even if it's a law that has to be enforced that would otherwise harm the homeless, we need it enforced so we can actually help them tangibly.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing that. It certainly opens some eyes in terms of some of the difficulties that are out there for the homeless. Yes, Sharon?
Well, I think most people know that Seattle has the third largest homeless population of any major city in the country. And what's important around the homeless numbers is we have homeless people who are considered sheltered, meaning they actually are indoors for part of the time. And the tragic part, of course, is that we have a bigger majority of unsheltered homeless people. And so the issue is, what are we going to do? Some people are saying, well, you just have to build more housing. Well, it takes 3 to 4 years to build a building, a multifamily building, and bring services and open the building. And so what's supposed to happen in the meantime? So we've had shelters. We had experience with lots of shelters, but as you can see during the pandemic, many shelters actually had to shut down because of the spread of COVID. And shelters are not, if you talk to people who are living in tents or living on the street, they do not necessarily want to move to a shelter. But if you present a tiny house, many people will consider a tiny house because if they're already in a tent, then they want that privacy. They want to keep their belongings with them. They want to, sleep separate from other people. So for some, it just happened to be that during COVID, that tiny houses were like the best place to, isolate, because you've got fresh air. You open the door, you have fresh air. You go to the kitchen. The kitchen has fresh air. I mean, it's really, it turned out to be sort of like, I don't know. It turned out that we had very, very few people that got infected with COVID who were living in tiny houses. Whereas many of the shelters and many of the, including hotels that were shared, like even if you're in a hotel during COVID, you have to share the elevator, you have to share the hallway, you're sort of, going from room to room, right? So what I would say is that we need solutions. Of course, we need more housing. So we believe in building more housing. And so we have about 1,100 units that are permanent supportive housing. And we hope to build more, this year and next year. But the tiny houses can be set up, we can set up a whole village in 6 weeks. And we are on Sound Transit property because of Councilmember Pedersen. And then we're on Port property by the Magnolia Bridge. And we're in Whittier Heights on City Light property. And we also have, we're on a number of church properties, which is great. It's absolutely wonderful to have church sponsors. And then I'm gonna have Barb, when she gets a chance to maybe pass out some information. We have this calendar that, there's 12 months. Well, we have 12 tiny house villages on the calendar. And then we also have information about if you're interested in tiny houses. But the tiny house movement has actually spread locally, nationally. So up and down the West Coast, even Denver and other locations, lots of people are doing tiny house villages because it gives people a safe place. They can lock the door. They can have their family with them, and they can then stabilize, and then the case managers are on site and help them find housing, help them get their IDs, and help them move into a safe place and permanent housing.
Okay. Ann?
So I think I want to lift up something that Sharon just said, which is that housing is the solution to homelessness, always will be. And if you are in a shelter or if you're in a tiny place, you are still homeless. And until we can find a way to create safe places for people to live that match their needs, that have a door and a shower and plumbing and electrical and are a place to live where you can lock the door, until we can create those places for everybody, we will continue to have more people living homeless. I also think, to Sharon's point again, the scale of the problem is intimidating. I think one of the big challenges that we sort of faced head on was some new numbers from that came out from King County. They did a cross-systems data analysis that pulled together information from multiple systems, the behavioral health system, the healthcare for the homeless network, public health, and our traditional homeless management information system. And what we found is that there are over 40,000 people in King County who are experiencing homelessness. That is significantly bigger than any number that we have seen before. That resets the scale of the problem and really makes the importance of this regional approach just ever more urgent. So I think that is something to keep in mind as we are thinking about how to address this. It can't just be one thing. It has to be a menu of options that suit everything. To Bill's point, there's a lot of moving pieces, and all of those pieces are important. And again, the purpose of the regional authority is to help turn that into a well-oiled machine. We are not there yet. We are working on it. We are building the plane while we are flying it. We are, creating a brand new government agency and a new system while operating everything we have so that there's no interruption in services, so that people can continue to do outreach and find shelter. So it's a big job. It is occasionally overwhelming, but it is also something that we have to do. I truly believe that this community does not think it's okay for people to live outside, and that when we come together as a community, we can solve big problems. So that's where I find my hope.
Okay. Alex?
So the question about challenges, obviously the biggest challenge is when you are experiencing homelessness and you're outside and you're suffering. And so I'm answering this question just from the perspective of city council challenges. And so that perspective is, I think, urgency, information, and behavioral health, I think so urgency, I think when we had it, last year when we were trying to set up a tiny home village, our office gets lots of inbound calls and emails from concerned residents. I want to thank my Director of Constituent Services, Malik Davis, for being here tonight. He gets a lot of these calls and requests. People are saying that there's somebody who's sleeping outside here. Can you do something for them? And so we're trying to respond in the moment to people who are suffering, and then turning toward different city departments and saying, this is urgent. We need, and there's, we're dealing with lawyers and different government agencies, and sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt, and then eventually just saying we're going to just shepherd this and get this done with Sharon Lee and get this in place with Sound Transit, that tiny home village in the University District. So that sense of urgency I'm seeing that, the reigniting of that with the new mayor, and the Regional Homelessness Authority is staffed up, and so we're seeing that sense of urgency. But I think that was a big challenge, is we've had this declared crisis for years. Where's that sense of urgency? In terms of information, again, this is perspective of City Council, where we're sort of at a high level trying to decide how to allocate funds and develop policy, even though we've turned most of that authority over to the Regional Homelessness Authority. Getting information about what's going on at a big level. For example, we just had a report about the outreach teams making contact with those experiencing homelessness and making offers of shelter, those being accepted, but the arrival rate, those arriving at that shelter later, it's only at a 50% rate. Now that's improved, but why is that at a 50% rate? Is it a transportation issue? Are there other barriers? People change their mind. Part of that is getting to this by names list that we talked about, which was really just individualizing, like treating people as individuals and keeping track of them in a respectful way that respects their privacy, and they don't have to fill out forms multiple times. I met a person experiencing homelessness this past weekend in the district, and his name is Bryce, and he went somewhere to try to get help, and they didn't have his information, and he had to give it again, and it was very frustrating for him dealing with that. And so that information of individuals, what their individual needs are, is really key, and I'm glad that the Regional Homelessness Authority is focused on that best practice. And then the issue of behavioral health. So as Sharon mentioned, this the homelessness response system is comprised of various shelters and tiny home villages and trying to get people into permanent housing. But then there's what we are seeing is the increase of unsheltered homelessness on the sidewalks, in our parks, in the greenways. And the longer you're outside, the behavioral health issues can get worse. And so then it becomes harder to get somebody to come inside. And so having those additional specialties, the peer navigators are going to help with that, to have specialized skills. We also need to help people who are experiencing behavioral health crises in the moment. And so there needs to be on-demand treatment. There needs to be a different response when you call 911. It can be sending out mental health providers instead of armed officers, for example. I've asked the Herald administration to come back with a plan to do that, 24/7 mental health, humane, compassionate, effective, evidence-based response. There also, there's a University of Washington in Northgate is building a building there that will provide more mental health beds. We need that as well. So those are the three challenges I see.
Thank you, Alex. Jenn?
Just checking. Yeah, mental health crisis is an understatement. What comes first? The loneliness, and you have a little bit of what that feels like through 2020, right? So what's it feel like to be living in a tent where no one looks you in the eye? Was he mentally unstable before the tent, or did the tent come because of the mental illness, or was it mental illness because of the tent? Wouldn't really know until you get them into some kind of stable housing like a tiny house village. Those work really good for intermediate housing because going straight from the street to housing is really traumatic. It's like a bus full of stuff. And you're just driving down the road and you got this big bus full of stuff and you got all your stuff right where it's supposed to be. And then all of a sudden you stop, hard stop. Everything comes flooding towards you. All of a sudden you are in these four walls and all you can hear is everything you forgot to do or you didn't do or somebody told you were terrible at. And so the loneliness and the depression comes in. So we need wraparound services when people get into housing too. Because it can be really traumatic to go from a tent to inside. And there's a lot of services that are doing that. There's a lot of things popping up. I mean, there's Humble Designs, there's Grow Home, there's Dignity for Divas. They all do in-home services and walk with you at least the 90 days, some of them even a year. Because it gets really crazy to go from that environment to all of a sudden you gotta pay bills and be responsible. There has to be some kind of, tiny houses work great for that. I heard somebody say that those were a terrible idea. No, they're not.
Thank you, Jenn.
But all of the shelters need to be there. I had a gentleman call me yesterday and he had to go do a little stench off somewhere else and then come back. And when he came back, he wanted to go back into the congregate shelter he'd been in because he felt comfortable there. Some people feel comfortable in that environment. Some people feel comfortable in the tiny house village. Some people feel comfortable in a tent city. So it just depends on their comfort zone. So we need to have all those options. I mean, we don't all eat the same food every night, right? So we need some broad options. But we do need to add something. Parking. Parking for the 49% of the people that live in their vehicles. And the ones with handicaps, and the ones that we don't see, and the invisible diseases, the proud that made it through 2020 holding onto their apartment and then realized that they spent all their savings and now they have nothing but their car. How many people do you think are out there right now? Because there are a lot more than you think. There's a lot more than you think. And they're working, and they're hiding, and they're very hard to find. But parking enforcement helps us very well with that. So does SPD. And some of the other services too, when they stumble into Lehigh, they get a hold of us, they talk to us, all the different food banks. We partner with University Heights. We have a parking program that we've filled up and have refilled up twice already this year. So we're getting people moving, but we need to have all those options.
Thank you, Jenn. There's no shortage of people that are involved in this. You've got the business community, you've got the social service agencies, you've got religious organizations, racial justice groups, volunteers, all kinds of people are involved. But the question that sometimes is asked is, well, how well are they working together? Are they competing for funds? Are they competing for attention? Or are they cooperating? Is it us against them? Or is it we trying to solve this problem? And I think that it's very easy, if you look back, to see that there was a time in the previous administration, mayor and city council didn't exactly get along with the best working conditions, best cooperation. So how do you build into this system that we have the kind of cooperation that's needed so that you're supporting each other's efforts and you're not duplicating one another? I think that's a very critical question. And how do you see yourself facilitating that so it happens in a positive way?
Well, I know Sharon's had a longer history with this, so I'll be interested to hear her answer. But one of the two things I want to say is, for years now, those who have done anything with people in vehicles, it was incidental. It might be like REACH, which does behavioral care and substance abuse care, and they might have one client who's in a vehicle. But they weren't ever funded to do intentional outreach to people in vehicles. And so what's developed right now, and the Seattle City Council for the last 2 years has funded us. We're the only funded organization to do vehicle outreach intentionally. And this year we have $206,000. Now, I don't know what the exact number for the rest of the system is, but it's in the 8 figures. So right now we've strengthened our left arm so much our shirt doesn't fit anymore, but our right arm is atrophied. That's what it looks like funding-wise. So RHA knows that. It knows it has a lot of ground to make up. It's been handed not only a moving train on this issue, a bullet train at that. So that's one of the things that it has to come up with, is better funding for addressing getting people into safe lots, or moving people who are able into a mobile home park if their RV is in good condition, or if their RV is totally debilitated, to get them into housing right away. Could be tiny home village. We don't have those pathways right now. So we need those pathways and we need funds. And then the other thing that's happening already, because of our partners, REACH and Catholic Community Services and others, we're beginning to cooperate on the streets. REACH is saying, well, we may not have been funded in our contract for that, but we're going to start doing intentional vehicle outreach. That's because we have like 75 people who go to the outreach meeting every Wednesday morning that's been convened by the Hope Team, Navigation, former Navigation, now Hope Team. But we have 75 different outreach workers who are all frustrated as any person can be at the barriers they keep facing. They're even bringing up moral challenges, if the system's even moral anymore. That's how frustrating it is to work with some people and to hit a barrier, even when you're the helper, to hit a barrier at every turn. Some of the lived experience people on our vehicle residency group say they've been turned away 15, 20 times over the years. They don't trust any of us anymore. And I usually say that to people when I move through. You don't have any reason to trust me, but we're going to try to be with you. So that's why the peer navigators will be important, but that's also why outreach is important. We're the first contact. And so we can do repairs. We can pay tickets. I accompanied a man to court last week, 2 weeks ago, and the judge forgave $500 worth of tickets. We can help people with that, but there's only 3 of, well, there's 4 of us counting me. That's not enough. And I think everyone knows that. That's why I'm sorry Deputy Mayor Washington didn't get here tonight. We had a meeting scheduled with her a month ago and it got rescheduled by Marc, and we haven't had it yet. But we need to get the mayor on board with this, because I know he cares. We just need to give him the impetus, not for the funding, but for the policy part of this. We need to get phone calls from parking enforcement again, so we can do harm alleviation. That fellow who I accompanied to court for the $500 in forgiven fines got his van towed because he got an orange sticker on it 3 days before, and they don't call us anymore, and so he got towed. And the judge said, well, it's like Seattle's punishing you with the money, and then we're giving it back through this Supreme Court decision. So it's not the best system right now. And I think the hard thing is the funding, and then we're working on developing the better partnerships. Now, these blue things I put on, these are for how a faith community can do safe parking. Now, Methodist colleagues in Lake Washington, United Methodist, have the best safe parking program that any private congregation has ever done. It's remarkable, and it's outlined in here how they're doing it as well as others. We've got safe parking at Our Redeemer's Lutheran Church through the Urban League. We've got some at University Heights, which, by the way, I should have plugged them. They're our fiscal host, University Heights Center. They have safe parking there. Any congregation can start it. The law is on your side. We passed a state law 2 years ago. The law is on your side. So if you have questions about that, please ask me.
Thank you, Bill. Sharon?
Well, actually, I want to say one thing about safe parking. We actually did operate a safe parking lot, and it was in the Yankee Diner parking lot in Ballard. And the problem was, at that point, the city said, okay, it's working great, but it's too expensive. And the only reason it was too expensive was because the city only gave us land for 20 RVs. So we had 24/7 staff with 20 RVs. And we could have done a lot more, but they gave us like this little piece of land and the rest of the parking lot was empty, right? So it was sort of like self-fulfilling, designed to fail by saying it was not cost-effective, but it did work. And if we had more land and they didn't put the fence, crowd us in on the fence, we could have served a lot more people. And we were able to get some people with their RVs, get them fix their engines, and then they could move on. And other people, we actually did move them into housing. So I think there are ways of doing it. And there's actually a very interesting model, which is if we had a tiny house village with enough land around it, we could have the RVs there, because people want to be close to their vehicle, which is their most expensive possession. And then they can live in the tiny house, because the tiny house has heat. And then there's the common kitchen, bathroom, laundry. I mean, we think that design could work really well. And for people who may not know this, but we actually house a lot of people who are living in their vans and cars in tiny house villages. Many families, families with children, are in SUVs, vans, and cars. So just so you know, it's not like anybody who's in a vehicle is not being addressed. But we do know that we know exactly how to end people's homelessness. It's not like magic, right? It happens. And if we did not have all the shelters or all the tiny house villages, thousands more people would be on the streets unsheltered. In terms of coordination, I just want to say one thing, which is I've been watching and observing this system, sort of like the outreach and the services are like Monday to Friday, 9 to 4, which is absurd, right? Because many people end up homeless. They spend all day looking for a place, and then they have nothing at night. So basically, we don't have outreach, and we don't have shelters opening for people who become homeless on weekends. Well, people become homeless on weekends, and people become homeless in the evening. So I think there's something we've sort of built the system that it's convenient for people who work 9 to 5, and then we forget that people have crises the whole all week long, right? And so I think the outreach has been too limited, that it's only 9 to 5, right? Because it's nighttime when you actually need the shelter, and you need the sleeping bag, and you need heat, right? And so I think that system should be changed around. And I think, and then what you talked about, we have so many outreach workers, and we've added so many outreach workers, but it's outreach to where, right? And so that's why we actually need more places for people to land, not just, talk to them about their issues, but they can actually find a bed, they can find a tiny house, they can find a short-term hotel shelter or something. So that's the problem, is we need to invest in the shelter portion and the housing portion. I think we're sort of imbalanced. We have more outreach workers than we have places to refer people. It must be very frustrating. The city gets together with the Hope team, and then they say, oh, how many tiny houses have opened up? Oh, how many shelter beds have opened up? Can you imagine, you've got 6,000 homeless people who are unsheltered, and you're gonna figure out which are the 8 people that are gonna go to this village, and which are the other 8 people that are gonna go to that shelter? It's absurd to be working that type of system.
Thank you, Sharon. We are getting educated tonight, I hope. Ann?
Yeah, I think the question was about collaboration. I do just want to say that most of the outreach workers that I have talked to are out there all the time. It's not a 9 to 5 job. Collaboration is the most important thing that we do. Again, the purpose of the authority is to coordinate all of these various programs that had in the past been sort of scattershot. And we hold ourselves accountable to people with lived experience. We listen to our community through very intentional engagement processes. One of the things that we heard was that people living in vehicles were not getting their needs met. And so, with Bill's help, brought together this vehicle residency working group. We have another working group on high acuity needs, so people with pretty serious mental and behavioral health care needs. We have another working group on outreach. We work with the Lived Experience Coalition very closely. We have them sort of give input and provide to make sure that we stay grounded and centered in what the real experience is. They also have seats on our board, so we report directly not just to City Council and County Council and the Sound Cities Association, but also to people with lived experience. And we have our friends in business and philanthropy. And so our role is as the convener and sort of the center of gravity that can bring everybody together. There's no shortcuts in that, right? You have to talk to people. You have to talk to people all the time, and you have to, say like, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's why we think it'll work. What do you think? And that's our job, and that's the work of democracy, and that's the work of improving a system.
Alex?
On collaboration, I'm very hopeful that just setting up the Regional Homelessness Authority is going to help with that, and the experienced nonprofits that they're working with, like Lehigh, that's all going to get worked out. What I want to see more of is collaboration with the other cities in King County. Where are they? Why aren't they helping out as much as they should be? And I think the Regional Homelessness Authority will be able to leverage their county-wide presence to get other cities to perform and do their fair share, so that the city of Seattle is not having to do everything, most of the funding, and providing all the services in the same centralized location. And the other thing is the Washington State Department of Transportation, when you're driving and seeing along the greenways the tents that are there, there's not as much effective outreach in that area, because there's this bureaucratic morass of, well, this is WSDOT land, but we need the city to come out here, and then which department is going to go out there. And so I think that there needs to be more collaboration with the state government. And the good news is the Harrell administration is working on a memorandum of understanding with the Washington State Department of Transportation, so that we can more effectively get out into those greenways and try to bring people inside.
Okay, thank you. I'm getting concerned about the time. Where are we?
5 of 8.
5 of 8. Okay, time goes by quickly. I'm not wanting to cut us short here, but I have, and you get your shot at this too. I just want to know where we want to proceed from here. We haven't handled public complaints. The tent encampments, the block sidewalks, the public safety concerns. Those things I would receive. I'm sorry the mayor's office isn't here today, because they sent me an email saying that they have reworked their system so that where they used to have 6 different departments trying to handle these complaints, they have now put them all together, so there is a way for all of them to be working together, and they're trying to respond to 1,500 complaints this year alone. And so that's what they're doing. And I'm sorry the mayor doesn't have a representative here to talk about that, but I just wanted to pass that along. I do think that housing is such a central issue. We might ask a question about that, or I could ask a question about what is the future success look like, and how would you define that, and what would have to happen for that to be there? Those are 2 questions I could ask, and given the time limitations, I wonder which of those you'd prefer. Pardon? Well, it sounds like you got both of them. Could we hit it quickly with both of them?
Bill, could we also hear from Jenn on the collaboration?
Yes, I want to hear on her. I don't want to cut you off, Jen. Go ahead on collaboration. Yeah, how we work together, the various groups that are involved.
Okay. Challenges. I collaborate with everybody. So I used to work at the Bridge Care Center in Ballard, and I had an office. And I realized that none of my people could get to people to get to their appointments. So I invited them to my office. And I went out and talked to the people and opened up my office so they could come in. Catholic Community Services took advantage of it. Solid Ground took advantage of it. Reach took advantage of it. Urban League took advantage of it. So that's how you build partnerships. That's how you build collaborations. You just, you know, you're there for them and they're there for you. Tomorrow I go to Soto to be with Reach, Lead, and Catholic Community Services to help with some areas that really need some help. But we don't have any housing. So what am I going to go tell them? Am I supposed to tell them to move on because neighbors and, no offense, some of you can be a little difficult. Thank you for the stop the sweeps. We can't just make people move on. We need to find solutions. We need sustainable solutions so that this continues to grow and not, you know, we just let this fester for a while, and we let people that were sick or mentally ill get worse. I mean, we ignored it, and we really need to turn that back around with these collaborations. And I mean, we've done such a great job. I mean, I don't think there's any competing anymore. It's not like it used to be. We all want this to have a good solution, and housing's one of the things that we need, because the only reason we have spaces 3, 4, 5 a day is because somebody left, or they got placed in the wrong place, or God forbid they're not here anymore. So that's what we need to focus on. We really need to focus on sustainable solutions and people working together. We need to build barns again. We need villages to help.
Thank you, Jen. And my apologies for passing by there.
I want to add something on.
Okay.
I want to add something on housing. None of us have said this word, and we're making it seem like Sharon has to build all the housing, and or her colleagues, and that there's no other way to be housed. This year we got, well, actually last year, we got vouchers from the federal government. Was it 1,400? 1,300?
Yeah,
It went to 3 different housing authorities. What that did for us on the street was we were able to help people build some capacity and then go out and look for an apartment, and they never had to meet Sharon or Plymouth or anybody else. They were able to go to housing in the private marketplace and get the federal government to help cover them. Now, the federal government usually does Section 8s. They do VASH, which is veterans. These were emergency ones, or didn't have all the case management that usually comes with a Section 8. But we had 14, which for our little program we were feeling very generous about.
And most of those people were over 65.
Yeah, and so they even had trouble finding the housing because our folks had to go out and help them find the housing as well. But my point is, there's other ways to stabilize people. That's the main thing, stabilize people. Housing is a really great way. Those are nice units, but it's not the only way to get people out of homelessness. So we have a private market we've not taken good care of. We've not worked well enough with landlords, or as one of my colleagues used to say, I'm a housing provider. He is. He sold his business, but he was going to come tonight. I don't know if you're here tonight, Charlie. No? Hey, there he is, my former colleague getting the state bill passed. But the point is, we have not taken advantage of the housing that's there and provided a way to fund the ability to be housed. That's critical. I mean, when I'm talking about moving RVs that are less than 10 years old into mobile home parks, I want to give them a voucher to pay for where they are. I mean, that's my idea. I have to sell it to somebody. But I just want to throw that in. Vouchers are critical.
Yeah.
That's the federal government. That's Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, all of our representatives. They have to work on that for us.
Yeah, I guess I could throw a metaphor out that was in the paper here recently. The people were involved in a musical chair game, and one of them had a broken leg, and he was on crutches. And so when the music stopped, guess who didn't get a chair? And the response to this was he didn't get a chair because he had a broken leg and used crutches. He got a broken leg because there weren't enough houses, enough chairs. It's a supply problem. And in a city, one of the richest cities in the United States, why is it that we have so many people unable to get housing?
So I wanted to say that we were really lucky this legislative session with the state. We had I think a record amount of funding for ending homelessness and building affordable housing. So basically the governor, the House, and the Senate basically put together $829 million for permanent supportive housing, for tiny houses, for shelters, and for affordable housing through the Housing Trust Fund and through rapid acquisition. And the governor pioneered a new program which was a little controversial, but it still got funded, which was if any local jurisdiction would prioritize moving people from right-of-ways, like public right-of-ways under bridges, state property, freeways, then there would be about $45 million that could be used to shelter people if there was a direct connection from moving someone into like a tiny house or into a shelter or a hotel. So this would be the year. Now the $829 million is statewide, but I think King County can try and grab a big part of it because, obviously because we have the largest homeless population in the state. And I think we should be really grateful that the legislature passed these funds. And I just want to say that one measure for me in terms of success, if with this community, if I had my dream, is that no one would die. No homeless person should be dying, living on the streets from exposure or violence. And so this past year, 129 men and women died just by virtue of being homeless and being on the street. Why aren't we measuring in terms of our own humanity that people should not be vulnerable, people should not be exposed and unsafe and murdered, or frankly, there's lots of ways of dying on the streets from homelessness. So I think I think that would be a good measure, and I think we ought to face that challenge.
Thank you for that, Sharon.
Excuse me, could we talk for a moment about the profoundly destabilizing nature of encampment suites? I would really like to hear what all of you have to say about that, because I was at one last Friday, and I was at one 6 years ago, and they don't get anybody into housing. They really don't. I mean, it's so rare to go from an encampment suite into housing. It's city policy that actually conflicts with what sounds like the county policy is going to be. And I would love to hear about how peer navigators are going to maintain longitudinal relationships with people who the police are moving out of their homes.
Displacement-based strategies don't work.
I'm sorry, could you say that?
Displacement-based strategies do not work.
Thank you.
We do not support sweeps.
Thank you.
And this is the topic every week of the Wednesday morning outreach workers. They're not, the city changed the language. They're removals, they're not sweeps, but we know they're sweeps. People get notified, but when you're in trauma, it's very hard to make a decision about, well, where am I going to go? Will I accept this referral if there's enough? Every week we have to set aside all of us who have referrals from other areas and target them for the place where the sweep or removal is going to occur. So all the rest of the homeless outreach workers who have people who need, like Woodland Park or Ballard or other places, we have no shot at getting a shelter because they're all targeted because there just aren't enough, number one. But it's also a political decision that's being made. And I don't want to pick on politicians too much, but it is a political decision that's being made that an area will be swept. And this isn't even starting the 10 million program yet. It hasn't even started. This is just business as usual in this new administration. And I just think the transparency is not as clear to the public as it needs to be. That's why I really wish the mayor's office would have been here. I wish the mayor would have been here. I don't want to work against them, but I don't want to support what you know are sweeps, right?
Can we go back just to the point about housing? Housing is the solution to homelessness. I'm going to keep saying it because it's going to keep being true. The rents, our housing market is bananas, right? Rents are rising, and every time rents go up, more and more people become housing unstable and are closer to losing their home, and that will continue to exacerbate the issues. So we have to figure out ways to create places where people can live, that they can afford. The emergency housing vouchers from the federal government were a great start. They are still a struggle to find places that, even with those federal funds, it's still hard to find places that people can afford. And you know, I think we can do better. My vision for how this ends, I would like to be out of a job in 5 years. I think that we can get everybody inside, and when nobody has to live outside, that's how we know we're succeeding.
One brief question I have, whatever happened to the idea that when developers build a new building, at least 10% of it should be set aside for low-income housing? For whatever happened to that idea? Yeah.
I can speak to that. That's a city government policy. So we talked earlier about, so this is still the same affordable housing question. We talked earlier about the Seattle Housing Levy, which is a property tax that people pay to help build low-income housing. In addition to that, when the city government decided to upzone about 30 different areas in the city, in exchange for granting that additional development capacity, the developer had to either pay into a fund or build a percentage, like 10% on site. I believe we have enough information now about that program where we're not seeing developers build enough of that housing on site. And the downside of that is you're not integrating the low-income housing in all the neighborhoods, and you're not building it fast enough, because if the developer just gets off the hook and can write a check, then that goes into a fund later, which takes 3 years to be built. There are benefits to having some of the developers pay that in lieu fee, especially when you're building a commercial building. You're not going to have housing there anyway. So we were shooting for a 50% on site. We're not achieving that. I believe we need to create more low-income housing, because to me it's not housing as a solution, it's low-income housing as a solution. And for that, we need to increase those mandatory housing affordability fees to incentivize those developers to build more on-site more quickly, so that we have more low-income housing faster.
And who has the responsibility to do that?
So the city council needs to do that. In fact, I've asked for a study on how best to increase those fees so that we can get more of that faster.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah.
Everybody else has been talking. Did you want to add anything?
So there's another question, and then I think we're drawing to an end, but go ahead.
All five of you have used the word tiny houses or tiny house villages. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, Marc and the mayor's office aren't here. When are we going to see a rollout of robust support of tiny house villages?
I can start with that. I can try to take that. Is that Mr. Castle?
Yeah.
Hi, Mr. Castle. To get elected, I doorbelled every block and met Mr. Castle. I won't tell him where you live. His son is very active in helping to create low-income housing throughout the city. So the tiny house villages, I mean, Sharon Lee is the expert, and so it's evolved over time. I mean, the model's gotten better. The exit rate to permanent housing has gone up. I mean, I was a skeptic of tiny home villages, but we have one that I helped facilitate in our district. The interesting thing to me is what's going to happen regionally. Like, what is when Kirkland or Lake Forest Park or Bothell, when they're doing their fair share, what are the different models that they want? So the Regional Homelessness Authority is trying to build this regional system, and here in Seattle, I think the City Council has demonstrated a commitment to tiny home villages, but every city is going to be different, and there are different models that work. So, but the City of Seattle has stood up a lot of these tiny home villages.
I'm going to just add something.
We haven't heard about the region, and I know it's come up. I live in Auburn right now, so I'll have a fun drive home. But Auburn has an outreach worker. Auburn houses RVs It has a food bank. It's part of the South King Housing Homelessness Partnership. It's 8 or 9 cities that have committed to build more housing in South King. They work with the Housing Development Consortium that had a nice big luncheon yesterday. Eastside has the Eastside Homelessness Advisory Committee that's been meeting since 2005. The North End has the North End Housing Homeless Coalition. So all the parts of the county are talking about this. They're working on it because they don't have the economic resources that Seattle has, but they are starting to work on it. It's not perfect. Salvation Army does outreach to everybody below Roxbury down to the end of King County. King County's funded them with 2 vans. We want that model for us. We want the vans. My point is that it is true that Seattle's carried the weight, and I think appropriately because Seattle has the money, it has the jobs. But it is changing, and I do think the pressure needs to stay on them through the Seattle Sound Cities Association and others. The pressure needs to stay on them. It needs to stay on all the mayors. And I think Alex knows when you come on council, there's nothing that introduces you to homelessness immediately. You know, your predecessor had a lot of learning and history, but when new council members around the county come in, there's nothing that really hits the ground running for them the same way. So the regional authority is going to have to become what the 10-year plan and the 5-year plan also had to take on, which was visiting those regional councils and upgrading them and updating them and all those things. So there's a need for, and so we started with a lot of faith communities. I want to look to the faith communities to help educate their cities. You know, they're there, they've been there. They have a historic role. And so that's one way we think we can help. But I just want to let you know, it's not like there's nothing happening, it's just not as visible in Seattle. The news media doesn't tend to report it very well. But I do think it would be a good encouragement to RHA to reveal better, and this is the communications person, reveal better what's happening in these other cities so that you can see that there's activity going on. Sophia Way on the east side. There
is a lot of activity going on. Actually, we have a whole sub-regional planning team with people dedicated to North, South, and East King County who go to all of those coalition meetings that Bill was mentioning and are really dedicated to working with the cities and the service providers to make sure that we are building a system that meets the needs across.
Mention winter response.
Oh, cold weather response, severe weather shelters. We, for the first time, we're coordinating across the county, and the response that we heard from cities and service providers we were working with was that they had never had this level of coordination before. Right? We had a daily call, we had information sharing, we were able to get people bus tickets and Lyft rides and make sure that folks could come in out of the cold, and it was a really good example of how collaboration can work well. Not perfect, still too many people outside, but you know, we're taking steps and we're getting there.
I just want to say that we actually have a tiny house village in Skyway, the Progressive Skyway Village. And that's been going great, and that includes families with children, and we have volunteers who built the tiny houses. And 2 nights ago, the Tukwila City Council voted to support 2 tiny house villages within the city of Tukwila, and both of them are sponsored by churches. So we are making progress, and if anybody can help us get a tiny house village on the east side, I would appreciate it greatly. We actually have a property owner and on Vashon who's wanting to sponsor a tiny house village. I mean, you know, so I think we're getting a lot more support, which is terrific. I will say that maybe my, you know, one thing that's really important is that Mayor Harrell campaigned and said that he would support 2,000 housing units, shelter beds, and tiny houses in his first year in office. If people remember that. And I think we need to make sure that that happens, because we're going to continue to have these horrible conflicts of people being swept, and outreach workers have no place to place people, and we desperately need that 2,000 units of shelter and housing this year.
One last question, and then I think we do need to wrap it up because some people are having to go. I do want to say, I am most appreciative of the people who have come today, Auburn and wherever you came from, to come and share with us your work, because what you're doing is so important, and your knowledge and your understanding is essential for us to learn from. I do hope that we all see how we can be a part of this solution and do our part wherever we can. Go ahead.
I'll be brief. My name is Barb Oliver. I'm Director of Operations for Sound Foundations Northwest. We build the tiny homes that Sharon, Lee, and Lehigh uses. Right now, there are 3 tiny home villages that are going to be built in King County, 2 in Tukwila, 1 in Kent, 1 in South End Village, which will open early next month, and 2 more in Seattle. Each village has between 35 and 50 homes, so that's somewhere around 300 homes. We have figured out in our organizations how we used to build homes, 2 homes every 3 weeks. Now we are building 2 homes every 3 days. And Sally Bagshaw and friends who are here will attest to the fact that we are right now in our Hope Factory, we are building 12 tiny homes at a time. It's not enough. We need 5 Hope Factories. And so we have a working meeting with Mayor Hare next week to address that problem. We got an idea. I can't tell you about it, but hang on to your hats.
I do want to thank you all for coming, and while we might find this sort of hard on our backside, imagine what it's like if you're homeless. We're sitting here in this comfort of this place, and we've got we've got friends with us, and we say, gee, it's been a long time, maybe we should go home. Where do you go if you don't have a home? So what we're about here is learning about the pain and the suffering that's in our midst. A city, one of the richest in the country, has this many people living without a home. And how can we, as people of faith and people who have any sense of conscience, stand by and not try to do our part to make a difference? So I really hope tonight we will have a fire lit under us, and we thank you for coming to educate us and help us move along on this journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.